Welcome back to the main stage. The guests on our next session today are located in New Zealand, one of the few countries in the world where large-scale events like the 36 America's Cup have been able to take place over the past year. The running of these events has provided the opportunity for our panel today to speak from their own experiences managing events in the midst of a global pandemic, and how through the use of event technology they were able to have the resilience and agility to be responsive to changes in government regulations, operating procedures and other risks that were presented. Before we pass over to our panel, we'd like to show a quick video provided by them here today that showcases the 36 America's Cup event from an event management perspective, with the use of event technology to deliver a safer and smarter event.
We were very fortunate to have such a massive global event in New Zealand, and particularly during the COVID. That in itself brought quite a few challenges, but to see the vibe of the city, to see how the crowd sort of built up, I was really, really rewarding. And the long hours, I guess, made up for by the experience, and particularly what happened on the last day with the whole city almost coming down and everything coming to a stop as Team New Zealand won the event. I worked for Foam Hand, who's a major event specialist company. Our involvement with America's Cup started in about early 2019, over 2 years before the event. We were responsible for setting up a major event operations centre, or the MEOC, where we had various key stakeholders from council, fire, police, St John and other organisations. And with all that information feeding in, and that need to share that information amongst our teams, was really one of the key factors for bringing in a specialist piece of software.
I lead the team at Blurter. Blurter is an event delivery platform that brings together communication, operations and safety in a single digital platform to deliver smarter, safer events. One of the things the pandemic has really highlighted to event organisers is the public health nature of their responsibilities when they're bringing people together in a mass gathering, and into how they're going to respond and communicate with their workforce, how they're going to create that real resilience and agility in their event planning.
2 minutes remaining on this video, 2 minutes
really
remaining.
Helping bring the levels of risk down and bring the operational efficiency right to the surface.
The day-to-day use with Blurter was just amazing. In probably our worst case scenarios where little children are separated from their parents, our use of Blurter was, where's the child, what's the name, what are they wearing? And I could instantly escalate it to the necessary department. In most cases, parent was reunited with child within about 5 or 10 minutes.
I spent a lot of time out on the ground, and even though I had a radio, having Blurter at my fingertips at all times was invaluable. So I'd see something, I'd be able to blurt it straight away and know that had been picked up by the team in the operations centre. The event like the America's Cup had a lot of variables, so things were changing constantly, and the weather was a key one. We could use Blurter to tell the volunteers, to tell the public about why the race had been delayed, when the race would next happen. I also found it incredibly powerful to be able to quickly take photos and document things that I was seeing when I was out and about from an audit perspective, so we can look back on how things have been dealt with.
We had a mobile phone handed to us on Saturday when there was heaps of crowds here, so we were able to take a photo of it to show everybody else. If someone came up to another volunteer and said, I've lost my phone, they'd know where to go.
This application is really helpful and give me all the update and what is going on. It's really nice to have this type of application to support, to facilitate our volunteer experience. So we can work as a team, become more efficient.
The app was fantastic for volunteers to use, for an event team to manage. I would definitely recommend Blurter, not just because of the app, but because the Blurter team, just great to work with.
And it's a very good morning and a very good Wednesday morning to our guest, Mr. Richard Gill from Blurter, who we saw in that video. Richard, very good morning to you guys over in New Zealand. How are you?
We're really good, thank you. Beautiful morning here. Nice chilly
Fantastic
winter morning.
Fabulous. Well, we're covering not just all time zones, but all seasons at Event Tech Live here today with you guys joining us. A great video to open up this particular session. I'll hand it over to you now, Richard, to bring in the rest of your panel today, and I'll see you a little bit later on for questions from our audience.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Look, it's a pleasure to be here with you all. I'd like to quickly introduce the other members of my team here on the panel today. So we've got Callum, who you saw on the video. Callum is with Foamhand, and he specialises in the planning and management of crowded places with a focus on ensuring people remain safe and secure without compromising their experience. We've also got Chanel Barrett from SB Events, who's done a lot of work in the sports arena and event management over many years, including being the event director for the World Triathlon Cup in New Plymouth, and as the event director for the 2022 WBSC Men's Softball World Cup. And Harry Gorange, who's joined us at Blurter recently. Harry brings a diverse experience working in the festival music and entertainment industry. And myself, my background is a tech entrepreneur. I've been building software for several decades in various industries, and have really enjoyed bringing that focus to the events industry over the last few years with Blurter. So what we thought we'd talk about today is how technology has helped deliver events in this current environment. And you saw the video clip of the 36th America's Cup. What a fantastic and exciting event that's been. We were hugely privileged to be able to run such a massive 4-month-long citywide event during this pandemic. And today we're going to talk about that, plus a number of the other events we've run. So you'll get a feel for how our customers and other events have been able to operate in that environment. Firstly, I thought it would be good to provide a bit of context about the operating environment we've had here in New Zealand over the last 18 months, as it's been a little bit different to what a lot of places have experienced. How we came to this is when the pandemic first hit, New Zealand did 3 things. Firstly, we closed our borders and locked them really tight with strict quarantine requirements for any returning citizens. Secondly, the government put the country into a complete lockdown, one of the most restrictive in the world initially. And thirdly, implemented very extensive contact tracing, and they pioneered some new genomic testing science that would trace every single case found in the community to its origin. What this meant was New Zealand was able to eliminate local transition within a few months and effectively reopen larger parts of our economy last year. The government also introduced an alert level system, and we're going to talk about that a little bit today in terms of the context of this. Alert level 1 was the lowest, which basically meant the borders are closed, but there are very few other restrictions on daily life. At level 2, mass gatherings were stopped, right the way up to level 4, which was a very restrictive lockdown. Everybody locked down except essential services. And these levels have changed throughout the last 18 months. An example of this was a single case of COVID was detected in the community, and it couldn't immediately be traced through genomics to the border. So the government put our largest city into a level 3 lockdown and the rest of the country into level 2 overnight. That effectively stopped events running. But we had this environment where events could run freely but could be cancelled at a moment's notice. And that created a really interesting environment, which we're going to talk a little bit about. You're going to hear references probably to alert levels. All you really need to know is if it's anything other than 1, events couldn't run. Today, we're also going to talk about some other technologies: temperature scanning, contact tracing, crowd analytics, team and crew communication tools, and obviously event delivery platforms. Just before we start, one of the key things that we've learned is the number one thing for event organisers is agility. How do you respond really quickly? How do you keep track of everything happening at once? And having a rapid decision-making process is really, really essential, not just a nice to have. Today we wanted to share the insights that we've learned in getting events up and running in this kind of environment, and hopefully they'll be helpful to all of you. And the only other thing is the pandemic's not the only risk our events face today. Weather, wild forest fires, security risks are all things that are playing in the environment that we're all working in. So how do we be prepared, and how do we respond, and how do we take the lessons from this pandemic and build them into our resilience as event organisers going forward? So welcome to the guests today, Callum, Harry, Chanel, great to have you on board. I thought since we started with the video, I'll turn over to you, Callum, and ask you a few questions. So about it, perhaps you could give us some quick insight into what your involvement with America's Cup has been.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Yeah, my involvement with the America's Cup sort of was very early stages in the planning was when it began. It was very much about sort of delivering a citywide operation to oversee, manage and run the America's Cup for the city. So we had numerous event sites all around the city. We had a large number of volunteers, staff, security, traffic management, etc. And we had a very sort of widespread operating environment. So there was a lot of variables, there was a lot of stakeholders, there were a lot of agencies and a lot of information that we were having to manage both in the planning phase and in that real-time phase during the event.
Right, and I guess, you know, in the COVID environment, uncertainty was a key thing. So things moving around, changing, the alert level, etc. What kind of technologies did the organisation put in place to try and sort of cope with that?
Yeah, so we had numerous technologies, and obviously even before COVID, when we were planning this was all pre-COVID. Technology was always a key part of delivering a world-class event like the America's Cup properly. So some of the uncertainty we had was around crowd sizes. It was an unticketed event. There were multiple stages around the city depending on what race course was used. So the number of people coming down was one of our biggest risks, and we employed various technology systems in order to sort of understand the crowd sizes, count the crowds, crowd analytics, CCTV, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, various types of technology in order to be able to have our finger on the pulse and really know what was going on the ground, so we could change our operations, we could inform our stakeholders, we could implement contingency plans and things like that. So there was CCTV, there was crowd counting, there was other measures in place for security purposes, and also obviously was that event management system, having something that was sort of the hub of all that information that brought it all together.
Right, thanks. And like one of the things I remember sort of seeing a lot of, which was an interesting thing in the America's Cup scenario, was that it was highly dependent on weather. So we saw a lot of cases where events were delayed by, the race start would be delayed by 5 minutes or 15 minutes or 20 minutes or an hour, and they kept updating the time start, and maybe they were changing the course that the event was going to run on based on highly changeable weather and wind direction. With an event this big and spread out over an entire city across the harbour with spectators in all sorts of different areas and activations that were engaging people, how did they communicate and how did they keep everybody in the loop as to what was going on? I know sitting in the MEOC for a while there in the operations centre, it was hard enough that to hear the delays and changes, but in terms of communicating that out to the volunteers, people on the front line, and the public, what were the challenges around that, and how did they go about solving those?
Yeah, so it was very dynamic, and the way it was set up, we had the major events operating centre, but there was actually some other operating centres that were really informing the race schedule and sort of taking the wind readings, the weather readings, and feeding that through to the MEOC and other places. The widespread nature of the event meant also that sort of traditional radio comms wasn't always reliable because of the extent of coverage required. So we had staff and volunteers all around the city who were being asked by spectators, being asked by the general public and others, what was going on? Why hasn't the race started? Is the race going to start? Is the weather going to pick up? Should we stay here? Should we go home, etc.? So we used Blurter very beneficially in that regard to be able to take that information that we were receiving in the control room and get that out to all of the people on the ground so they could keep the general public as quickly as possible as to what was going on, and they could then react accordingly.
Cool, awesome. Chanel, I'm keen to get an idea from you as to some of the events you've been working on during this period. I know you had the Taranaki Triathlon Festival, amongst other events. One of the key things you also had was a nationwide event that had to pivot to being a national event when the borders closed. Can you tell us a little bit about the environment that you've been operating in with some of your events?
Yeah, it's been an interesting environment. I guess the big word at the moment is pivoting, which everyone is talking about, pivoting into a different direction, or how we can change our event to suit the environment that's currently happening. So we own and run a international event, so it's the Taranaki Tri Festival, which includes the World Triathlon World Cup normally. With our borders being closed, this meant that if we wanted the athletes to come in like normal, it was going to cost us about $1 million to bring them in and quarantine them for 2 weeks, which certainly wasn't something we could add to our bottom line budget, especially during COVID times with businesses not being able to sponsorship events as much as they normally can. So we had to look at our event and go, how can we still operate? The first year we had to cancel, we were completely in lockdown, so we had to cancel our event. But second year we definitely wanted to come back, and we looked at it and said, do we stay out of the community? Do we try and come back? Because obviously the international event was the focus. So we looked at it and said, well, let's try and run a national event and see if we can make this work to ensure that we can stay within the community. The biggest thing there was obviously looking at technology and how that could help us to make these decisions, make things operate on the ground. I know earlier, Richard, you said that events in New Zealand can't operate at level 1, but we started to get clever as to how we could operate at level 2 and going, okay, if we are at a level 2, which seems to be happening a little bit here in New Zealand, is how can we operate, how can we be clever? So that was where we brought technology in, and Blurter was our biggest friend at that point in time, especially around communication. We found our volunteers, who are normally of the older generation, because they have the time to come and volunteer, were a little bit nervous about volunteering during these times. So it was good to know that we had a communication platform at our fingertips that we could get these people on and communicate with them pre-event as to what's happening, what changes are going to be, how we're going to look after you, what to expect on site because it's different than normal, and also if we had any COVID disruptions and things like that, we could definitely communicate with them on site, which was great. So that was something that we did around our major event, and then we've had other national events operating again. And the biggest thing we learnt during this time was probably communication to everyone, not only to our team, to our volunteers, but also the people that were coming. So we had planned out and thought about what we were going to do, and we went out there and said, these are our plans. We're ready for as much as we possibly can be. And people were really receptive to that. They really brought it on and knew, hey, look, if we're operating at level 3, we won't be happening. And that was okay. People were like, okay, well, we understand that. So it was a really good chance to really start to communicate and for people to see that we were humans, but we were also very organised in what we were going to do. So the events that did that here in New Zealand definitely had a really big uptake. And it was interesting, we were concerned that our numbers would drop because of COVID, people would be a bit nervous. It went the absolute opposite. So we were absolutely smashed with the entries. One of the events I worked on, the Mount Festival, for the first time in 5 years, we had to close entries off because we were completely full. So something we didn't expect, but definitely a nice surprise.
Right. Yeah, that's one of the things that we have seen in New Zealand as restrictions came off and as events could operate. We did see, right across the spectrum, events selling out and concerts selling out, and a lot of events getting sort of record numbers of people, which has been really interesting. Harry, you've been involved in some music and festivals over this period. What kinds of challenges did you see for these events reopening?
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, I think it's an interesting point you raise, and also with Chanel raising it, and the fact that everything's sold out. You had a lot of event organisers around New Zealand that were trying to deliver on events that they knew there was an enormous amount of pressure to deliver on them because there was literally nothing else, and they also sort of had that guillotine hanging over their neck with the knowledge that as much as they put into these events, there was every chance that the day prior, 2 days prior, or the day during, that the event was going to be pulled out from underneath them. So I was able to work at a number of music festivals and contract to a number of events over the New Zealand summer, some of which were affected by the virus re-entering our community, which was rare enough to happen. And I sort of got an interesting insight as to what it was like when an event was and also wasn't using Blurter. So I started off here at Blurter back in December, which is New Zealand summer, and saw sort of both sides of the equation. One iteration I had during my time at Blurter was with the Napier Art Deco Festival, and that's an event we've been working with for a number of years now. They were unfortunate to have a nationwide lockdown impede the delivery of their event. I think it was 3 or 2 days prior to them executing on a citywide event that the rug got pulled out from underneath them. As unfortunate as that is, I think everybody is prepared for those situations now. We don't have any choice, but they had the added advantage of being prepared with event delivery technology, having the ability to turn around and tell a very large workforce of contractors, volunteers, and staff that they were only able to come in and pack down their stations in groups of sort of less than 10, and able to adhere to those rules that were put in place by our government without having to sort of hope that somebody had checked their emails or hope that they'd pick up the phone. And I think as many of us know, working in the event industry, that you're working big hours. You're working in sort of in a dream state some of the time, and oftentimes it's more autopilot that people work on. So to have an effective communication strategy via Blurter was an enormous advantage, I think, for Napier Art Deco. Another example would be the Wings Over Wairarapa air show. Again, a similar situation, but probably a little bit more heartbreaking for them, and that they had their event cancelled halfway through. And this is one of the largest events in the region, with an enormous amount of volunteers working on site. And they had the situation where they had, I think it was late that night, that there was a nationwide lockdown put into place, where they basically had to turn everybody that wanted to come to the air show away, as well as everybody that was planning on being at the event in a working capacity. So in terms of the fact that an event still needs to be packed down, it still needs to be cleared out. You can't just leave infrastructure lying around the ground and sort of rotting until such a point in time as the government removes restrictions. Once again, they were able to use Blurter to communicate to their entire workforce that you could return in smaller groups, and they were able to sort of bring the festival to a conclusion without sort of putting anyone's health at risk, as well as upholding sort of obligations to contractors and all that sort of thing. So not losing too much good faith with customers is a huge part of that as well.
Cool, interesting, and I think Harry, Chanel, you both really emphasise the importance of communication across across your whole workforce as a key way to do that, and to get the message out and to create that agility and responsiveness. Callum, you also touched on the fact that I think you gave an example in the video we all saw of the cow in sorry, no, it was a goat, wasn't it? A goat in the middle of the city with a flag on it, and as an example of being able to blurt things in or send messages back into the team about what's going on. Were there other examples that you saw, perhaps with America's Cup, where it wasn't just about a broadcast out to your workforce to tell them what's happening, but you're able to use technology, in this case Blurter, to get the information back in from your volunteers and your workforce, that kind of intelligence of your eyes and ears being out there in the field, being able to communicate. And how important was that to the responsiveness and the ability to react to the changing circumstances?
Yeah, no, thanks, Richard. Using technology to get information, I guess, from our very large group of people on the ground into the decision makers, into the operating centres, and into the places where we could sort of deal with that information and address any issues or resolve any problems was really important. I spent a lot of time out on the ground, as I sort of mentioned on the video, and that ability. Volunteers out there, they knew that if they saw something untoward, they could take a photo of it, they could send it in, and it would be picked up by someone in the control room and be managed and sort of work through to resolution. And from my perspective, from a crowd management side of things, the size of the crowds, where the crowds were going to congregate, how they were going to behave was a risk pre-COVID, and like lots of events, is a continual risk when it comes to managing the reputation of the event, managing the safety of the event, and I guess the experience of the spectators. So information about where crowds were, photos being taken and sent to the control volunteers from our security staff and even from our management staff like myself was really, really important and key to us being able to I guess demonstrate that agility to respond promptly to those communications, close them out, and also at the end of the day, if things have been identified that hadn't been addressed at the time, we could then see what was there and make sure they were resolved before the next day of operation, which for a 4-month event like the America's Cup was a really key thing, was that continual refinement, using the information, using the communication and things to continually refine and enhance the event.
Thanks. Yeah, look, you raise a really good point. I mean, we've given some examples in some of these where they're one-day events or an event that goes for a few hours to a few days to, nearly 4 months. And the opportunities that you get, I guess, in a long-running event, the data and being able to take the data that is gathered during the event and be able to continually refine. And with small events, where you're running lots of smaller events, the ability to take that data and improve for the next event going forward. Harry or Chanel, I'm anyone pick this up, but I'm kind of interested in how you can take the information of. Have you got examples that you can think of where things have happened and you're able to go back and deeply analyze it and very rapidly make changes for the next day of an event or the next event, as to, based on sort of the data that's been gathered in the system in terms of perhaps communications, incident tracking, hazard management, etc., and be able to really rapidly change that on the fly?
Yeah, I guess incident management is probably the biggest thing that we find is really helpful, especially using Blurter to help us manage the incidents around that. A lot of the events that I'm doing at the moment are single day events. So literally you're trying to make decisions very, very quickly. We have generally got live streaming TV. So live streaming around the world. So decisions have to be made very quickly on the fly and changes made very, very quickly to ensure that the day continues to run smoothly. So the incident management side of things is where we can quickly analyze an incident, see what's happening, and see what changes we can make to make sure this is going to improve throughout our day that we are operating. I guess the other part is around the incident management is making sure that we're watching if there's common things happening. So by looking at the map through the Blerta app, what we're able to see is where alerts are coming from. So if we're seeing a really hot spot where volunteers are sending through a lot of communication, we're getting a lot of information coming back from them, and we can continually see that this little area is becoming a bit of a hot spot, then that's normally when I can send one of my team in to have a look and see what's going on, so as we can manage things very quickly and not let them escalate out of control.
Cool. Excellent. So I've been sort of thinking as we've been talking that all of the examples we've given are really just good practice health and safety and operational management for events. And what the pandemic has done, and this situation that we've had here where restrictions change rapidly, is just taking that. It's like good health and safety on steroids, isn't it? It's about taking your responsiveness and being able to do it very well but very quickly and change on a dime. And perhaps traditionally what we've done where we have had health and safety plans, they will have been in a document somewhere. They'll be on somebody's email, etc. So one of the things that is really obvious sort of coming out of this is the ability to make that very live and be able to make your decisions on the fly.
The other thing, Richard, that it's taught us is just around technology. I know as an industry, and I'm sure we'll all attest to this, as an industry we'd all got used to using Excel, using Word, using PowerPoint to manage our events, and this is how we'd always done it. And these events had operated for a number of years, and it's just easier to roll the same thing out year after year after year. Whereas through COVID, we've learned we've got to change, we've got to make some changes. How can we, one, change our event that people are going to be interested in coming to it, but also what technologies can we use? So we've all gone through that point of change is okay, and we can make it happen and we can make it good. So it's grabbing those technologies. I mean, COVID, I know for my team, has been great in teaching people what a QR code is. So I can thank COVID for that, not much else. But it has been good in the fact that people have learned, technology is okay and we can use it. So it has allowed our industry to evolve a lot in a very short period of time and look at technologies and say, how can these help us? What can we use in lots of different ways? The traditional radios are not necessarily the best way of doing things these days. So what else can we use? And it has allowed us to do that. Yeah,
certainly forced us to change in a lot of respects, having this virus sort of go through the world. In a real life scenario, I think it's sort of, Blerta is something that I think a lot of events and a lot of organisers are, traditionally are unwilling to go down the road of new technology. But when a situation happens that, mass communication is required among all of your, staff and stakeholders, it's the ultimate tool that you wish you had. I was involved in an event down in Christchurch at the beginning of the year where we went into, it was an Auckland-wide level 4 lockdown due to community cases being present. This news came through sort of in dribs and drabs. There was an announcement the Prime Minister was going to be speaking, and I was sitting backstage at the festival reading this thing saying we were going to go into lockdown that night. And there was all these sort of, pieces of information about Aucklanders that were travelling around the country and what they were doing. And it was the middle of a concert, and there was no real way, I think, of the festival organisers to communicate to everyone at the festival, what the next step was, because there was obviously a lot of people from all around the country that had travelled to be there. and to be honest, that nothing really happened. I mean, I think that I wouldn't call the festival out and say they did a terrible job, but I would say that, you know, there was a situation there where there were a lot of people grouped together. They had an opportunity to use their large workforce and their means to communicate to everybody what the next step is and what people should be doing, rather than sort of getting home at 3 a.m. and realizing that all this stuff has happened and they could have, you know, potentially been in quite a lot of danger or putting other people in danger. Obviously, you know, that event wasn't using Blerta or using any form of event delivery technology like that. But I think if you'd sort of turned around and said, this is what you could have done, you know, it really would turn heads and change how they looked at it.
It's interesting, Harry, because... Sorry, Richard. I'll just say on the reverse of that, Harry's example there was very much about, I guess, going into restrictions sort of during an event and what that meant. On the reverse of that, on one day during the America's Cup was an operational day. The racing was scheduled for that afternoon. We were under level 2 lockdown, so no mass gatherings were allowed, but the racing was still happened. It had been agreed the racing could still happen, education, communication gone out to the general public, all staff, etc., that no one was to come in because the racing was on, but there were no spectators allowed. At midday that day, so 4 hours before the racing started, the government made a sudden change to the alert levels and actually reduced the restrictions, so gatherings were allowed, just like that. So as an organisation, we had to get messages out to everyone to tell them that change and to try and bring staff on board to help with managing and adapting to that change. And in the reverse, having that communication ability, the instant communication to get out there without using emails and things was really powerful.
I guess in that case, you would have had the challenge that the general population would have heard that the restrictions were off and they knew racing was on, so they would have been coming into the city regardless. So the challenge there was actually standing up a workforce at a moment's notice when you know they've been stood down. So yeah, really interesting example there. I guess what we're talking about in the mega trend here is really an aspect of digital transformation in the event delivery or in the delivery part of our events. And I think when you look at the event industry, it's gone through a lot of digital transformation. Probably started in the ticketing area and marketing, and this transitioned into sort of the planning phases of events. But it sort of seems that the actual delivery, the on the day, the health and safety, the communications around the actual sort of pack in, event execution, pack out is still been largely analog, and radios, Excel, emails, old paper, and what we're talking about here is this transition to how can we implement digital technologies to make that delivery really smooth. And the key things that we get out of digital transformation are the efficiencies. So you can do more with less. You can be more agile. You can be more responsive. You can pivot if you need to, and those kind of advantages. Callum, I'm also interested, you were involved in some other technologies around the delivery of the America's Cup. You mentioned before the sort of CCTV and crowd analytics, and I'm kind of interested as to how that played into the execution delivery.
Yeah, well, I guess that was also another example of, I guess, you know, sort of technology evolving and digitizing in a way. Obviously, crowd counting and things like that for many years has been a sort of a manual process. Your security guards, your volunteers are keeping track of your crowds, particularly for an open public space like where the America's Cup was held. So with the use of CCTV, not only did we have the vision of key areas in our control room via the CCTV, but we had the analytics overlay on that CCTV, and it was set up such that we actually had instantaneous information on the occupancy of key areas, on the behaviour of the crowds in those areas. And that technology allowed us to not only understand what was going on the day, but allowed us to look back at the day and to adapt our plans for future days as far as resourcing levels, critical congestion points and other things. So that digital overlay, I guess, on the CCTV gave us a lot more sort of robust information, and it also allows the staff to focus on on looking after the customers, on looking after the spectators, guiding them around, helping them out, as opposed to being there, counting them and not doing anything else. And again, I think we talked about, the cost of these measures. When you look at where you're saving money and where you're spending money, and the robustness and the accuracy you're getting, it's the return on investment is significant. And it does actually save you money elsewhere and allows people to be freed up to do other things in their own.
Guys, I'm going to jump back in here, if that's okay, and start wrapping things up and saying thank you to Callum, Harry, Richard, and Chanel for this session this morning for them, this evening for us, this afternoon somewhere else in the world. Lots of people tuning in from lots of different locations. Thank you to all four of you for input. If I could ask just one sort of quick question before we wrap things up, guys. And Richard, perhaps you could either take this one or direct it to whoever you think may be best suited to answer it. But you touched on the alert levels there changing, and the reactive nature and the reaction process that had to be implemented into the event plan. And events, large-scale events particularly, have to work with an element of reaction built into them. Do you think that with the planning that's had to go into dealing with the different alert levels and the reaction to the COVID situation is ultimately going to lead to better protocols and better delivery of events when we ultimately get beyond the pandemic?
I think that's a really good question. I thought perhaps Chanel, you might like to take this one.
Yeah, I'd 100% agree that it has definitely made us look into all of our processes and, like you said, make those really quick decisions. So we've done, spent a lot of time around our planning going, okay, we need to just plan exactly what we can foresee for the future and to be able to make those quick decisions really quickly. And I think that's not only been around those alert levels, but it also, like you said, does make us look at our entire event and go, okay, this may not be COVID, just in the near future. It's going to be something else in the future, whether it's another pandemic, whether it's something else. How can we make these decisions quicker, and how can we make sure our planning is going to be right, that we can make these decisions on the fly really quickly and adapt so quickly so our events are not impacted like they have been previously, and allow us to continue to operate. Because I think as an industry, we've been really hard hit. So it is definitely something that we have looked at, and that planning is so key to be able to look at things in the future.
Absolutely. And I'm sure I speak for a lot of people over here when I say that when we looked at some of the glorious pictures of people attending events in New Zealand, we all looked on with great jealousy. But I would like to say congratulations for your involvement with an event as prestigious as the America's Cup. It is one of not just the big sailing events in the world, but one of the biggest sporting events in the world. So congratulations on your involvement in it. And thank you very much for joining Event Tech Live today to talk about your experiences and to talk about the technology element of it. Thanks very much to all four of you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.